உலகெங்கும் தமிழரின் பிம்பம் உங்கள் TVI.
Good afternoon, dear viewers. Welcome to CrossRoads on TVI. I'm your host, Parthe Kandaval. Today, we remember all the women and men that sacrificed their hopes and futures so we could live out ours. We take this day to honor their sacrifice and most of all, their dedication to the ideals of hope and freedom. In this vein of rights and freedoms, this week we saw our neighbors to the south exercise their most fundamental right by going to the polls this week and re-electing Barack Obama as the 44th President of the United States of America. With the elections almost a week behind us, post-election coverage seems not to be waning, with many questions still on people's minds, people already postulating the 2016 ticket. Today, we will touch on some of these issues, and in particular, where Canada fits into all of this. Canadians, especially young Canadians, seem to be almost enamored by the US election process, leaving many to wonder what is the relevance of this, if any, to Canada, and why is American politics able to galvanize people even beyond its borders, while it seems Canadian politics is not able to even arouse its own constituents. Joining us in this discussion are Rory Dixon, a PhD candidate at the Wilfrid Laurier University, and Tam Sivadasan, who is no stranger to us and a well-known host on TVI. As always, please call us at 416-623-8100 to ask your questions and share your thoughts and opinions. Welcome to the show, Tam and Rory.
Thanks for having us.
Appreciate making the time. So, how do you think Barack Obama, to give some context to our discussion today, what are your thoughts on his first term in office?
For me, it's disappointing on several fronts, but the constituency that has been supporting Obama was not supporting this time around. That is the strong left of the movement there, and also the younger generation, especially. Reasons, the promises that he had made during the first term were not fulfilled. Example, his quest for closing Guantanamo Bay was not done, and also he was showing as though that he was a proponent of justice done to these so-called terrorists arrested in foreign lands, brought over to America, really brought to justice and all that. But in the end, he has been attacking them with drones and all that, so that they don't need to be brought to America. So that that will be affecting his re-election, so to say, right? So you think those kind of things in policies that generally there is this is belief that the policies of Obama was very insulated into becoming.
So you think he continued the Bush approach to foreign policy?
Bush, rhetorically, yes, he said, but he had not done that. For example, when Osama bin Laden was supposed to be found in Tora Bora Mountains, he was approached by CIA to, CIA requested for more men and ammunition, but they were not given. Knowing that it would have been an ideal situation, it could have eliminated Osama bin Laden and then could have got some glory out of it, but he didn't do that. On the other hand, also Obama definitely did. Why? There wasn't any necessity at that time, right? Just to score some points so that he would be re-elected, right? So the foreign policy of Bush were more of a rhetoric than the actual doing. Obama did, and he didn't do the rhetoric.
Okay, so we'll focus on the foreign policy file. Sure. Rory, how do you feel on?
Well, I think I probably have a bit more of a positive take on Obama's record in terms of foreign policy, especially. Especially when you look to the previous years under Bush. I think Obama has been much more moderate overall.
Okay.
And I think he's handled a few pretty difficult situations quite well. I think Libya needs to be mentioned. I mean, I think he really demonstrated that he'd learned the lessons of the failures in Iraq. The Americans were a part of a genuine coalition, I would say, as opposed to the so-called coalition that went into Iraq. Second of all, they got Arab League approval. So there was some, I mean, I'm not saying the Arab League is definitively representative of people in that region, but there was some local support for the action. And then finally, the action itself was fairly swift, and I would say fairly effective with minimal fallout. Not to say that there hasn't been, and the situation in Libya is granted not totally stable, but I think that situation could have been played much worse, and I think Obama played it fairly well.
Tam brought some relevant points regarding, he promised to close Guantanamo Bay, but also the continuation of using drones to achieve foreign policy objectives.
I mean, I would say with Guantanamo Bay, I mean, I don't know, I think that's a failure of Obama's, but I don't know if it's a failure of effort. As I understand, he did try, but met pretty serious resistance in Congress. And I think that's probably partly to blame for a lot of the failed promises, you could say. I don't think it was things that Obama didn't want to do, that he was saying he wanted to do and then never did. Things he genuinely wanted to do but couldn't because of the American political situation. So that would be my take on the Guantanamo Bay thing. Now, in terms of drones, this is probably where I think he's sacrificing long-term strategy for short-term strategy, in my opinion, in the sense that the short-term strategic value of drone strikes is undeniable, I think. I mean, they've literally decimated the leadership of Al-Qaeda and the Taliban. There's no question about that.
But at what cost? I mean, I think...
Exactly.
Yeah. Every terrorist killed, there was 10 civilians, mostly women and children were killed. That's the statistics from a prominent UK politician, right? So, 10 civilians for nearly 600 something drones, in action now. And not only that, the drones are being built now. It's like most of these military machineries, military industrial complexes in America, right? They are switching to inexpensive, very effective means of, using arms and ammunitions, and such as these drones now, very cheap to manufacture, very easy to control, and also it's another the PTSD effect of these on these soldiers on the ground. Now it's not necessary because they are operating from an American land or Britain or Canada for that matter, and they don't need to see the sufferings of those people being killed. So it's psychologically it's not affecting them. So it is in the benefits of the American military system, right? So you don't need to be on the ground, whereas you can get more effective on the killing rate, right? So not only that, the drones are being manufactured and sold. For Britain now, they started investing in that. Canada has already used it in Libya, I heard. So every countries are being drawn into this the drone warfare now.
On that note, one of the criticisms the Republican Party had of Obama is that after he came into office, they called it his apology tour. He went across the world and he gave speeches, and they seen it he was being soft. Connecting that to the use of the drones and a very precision type of military strategy, do you think it's is it backfiring on Obama that the use of these drones and the civilian casualties, is he gaining good graces with the Muslim world like he intends to?
No, they've taken a poll in every country was the favorite of to become president, and then Pakistan voted 97% against Obama. So that tells the story that that is Pakistan is a model Muslim world, right? It is viewing Obama as an anti-Muslim. But he's in a tightrope. I agree, right? He's in a tightrope, right? Sometimes people say that he's not enough black for blacks, and then he is, he's not enough white for whites. So he is in the tight spot. We agree, but But he puts up what I don't like is that he's showing a face of compassionate, humanitarian type of guy to attract the grassroots, right? Grassroots are mobilized in this instance. But whereas he is serving the masters of these Wall Street and those special interest groups, right?
We'll come back to the domestic aspect of his administration, but Rory, I was curious to your thoughts on this. Is this type of strategy working? What he's doing in Pakistan and Afghanistan, but also being, appealing to the Muslim world and trying to connect with them?
I mean, I think if you look at overall his policy in the Muslim world, it's partially successful, and there's been some partial failures as well. And the way I think about it is, if you kind of regionalize it, I would say actually in the Middle East he's done fairly well. I would give him a fairly decent grade on how he's performed in the Middle East, just in terms of not getting more involved with Syria, when especially the Republican Party wants to see more involvement, like arming the rebels, things like that. Things which I think the calculus of that, they haven't fully figured out yet. Who are going to have the weapons? You have Al-Qaeda style groups now sort of getting into Syria. So I think he's performed well there by not being over-involved in Syria. And then again, Libya, I think, needs to be acknowledged as a foreign policy success. I mean, I tend to agree that the Afghanistan-Pakistan region hasn't been dealt with as well. I don't think he's succeeded in the sense that the surge in Afghanistan has basically failed. I mean, I think even most American military elites are acknowledging that it's basically been a failure. And as you pointed out, I mean, he's completely alienated the Pakistanis. I mean, just the public has completely alienated from Obama. So that definitely shows the unpopularity of the drone campaign. But I don't know if we can say that then that represents the majority of the Muslim world, because in Libya, as we saw after the killings there, you had many more Libyans coming out protesting against the killings and in support of the Americans in the region, just because of I think, again, the successful way that was dealt with.
Okay, so moving into domestic U.S. politics, Tam, what are your thoughts on has he been able to achieve what he set out to domestically?
I think he was. He handled it very well. I could give him a 5-star for that. Just. Because he knew that he alienated the grassroots that worked for him in 2008. Okay. But this time he used at least 1 million, approximately 1 million volunteers. So instead of blowing his own trumpet on his track record, he didn't do that to the public. That was done by the volunteers. So anything that if he was very careful of making a gaffe, anything that will turn the tide against him. So he handled it through the grassroots at the grassroots level, and then he used only the economy to propagate his views, right, rather than the foreign policy.
And do you think he was a success? He handled the economy well?
He handled very well. Yeah, he handled very well. On the other side, Romney, he looked after his constituency not because of his choice. It is because of necessity. Because he started off, is seen as a moderate. He represented the most liberal state in the United States, Massachusetts, and then so he did some good thing to attract the middle ground independent constituencies, right? But why did he shift himself to the Tea Party's agenda?
Yeah, we'll come to the Republican primaries in a bit, but. Rory, there's a lot of criticism that Obama was too right, or center right at least, in his economic policy. He didn't achieve everything in terms of Obamacare. Are those criticisms valid?
Well, again, I mean, I think you have to look at the context. I mean, you really the Republican Party, although as we saw in this last election, is clearly losing power, is losing national appeal. It still has a lot of power in Congress and in the United States in general, and it also has a lot of power to shift debates and things like that. So if you look at the bailouts, for instance, some Republicans just wanted to let the auto industry basically collapse, and even wanted to let some of these larger banks just completely collapse. And I think most economists, or at least the ones that I've been listening to, have said that Obama successfully prevented this Great Recession from becoming a Great Depression by doing these fairly large bailouts. Now, some people on the left may have said there should have been larger bailouts, but again, if you look at what's the other end of the spectrum, he comes down middle to probably middle left on this case. So I think in terms of the bailouts, he did well. And then in terms of healthcare, I mean, yeah, the finished product I don't think is very pretty. I think it's very complex. It's probably too complex, and costs still seem to be rising significantly. But again, if you look at all of the people in the United States who don't want any sort of government presence really in healthcare, I think you have to say that it was a success.
Tam, coming back to your point about the Tea Party uprising in the 2010 midterm elections, what precipitated that? What do you think?
Well, but the Republican parties have been hijacked by Tea Parties and more right wings. What their agenda is simple: it's smaller government. They don't want the government interfere with their daily lives. That's it, right? But that's not the Republican parties under Reagan. Reagan was I think the last president who stood up to these small interest groups such as this Wall Street and all that, right? So, but now the Republicans, the Tea Party, has been seen as too extreme for these special interest groups. They want a government that can be manipulated by themselves, right? So Wall Street, energy sector, or industrials, Midwest agriculture, plantation in the South, all those people, right? They have their special interest that can be manipulated to a certain extent. Like Wall Street, in 2008 gave $10 million, whereas McCain campaign got only $6 million from the Wall Street, right? So why is that? It's supposed to be the other way around, right? So the special interest groups, they want a president that can be handled, to satisfy their agenda. But the Tea Party is not in that spectrum. They want extreme right-wing religious, and their agenda is totally different. But their majority white males supported that because they are in the spectrum. But that is not what in these days with the multicultural and melting pot America, that is not a winning ideology, right? So the Tea Party has, they want smaller government, religious, and then they don't want these minority issues like gays and those kind of thing,
to come about.
So, yeah.
Rory, why do you think this came about? Like, why did this happen in 2010 as opposed to, say, during Bush's time, who, ran up the deficit more so than
It's
Obama?
A good question. I mean, you could say that there was sort of maybe a tipping point, and that really the economic collapse, in a sense, or crash, I guess, of 2008, I think really has to be taken into account. I think that really galvanized people to start thinking that, systemically there's something wrong, which we saw with Occupy and the Tea Party. They're sort of, different ends of the spectrum, but they're both protesting similar things. So, I mean, I think the Tea Party makes sense when you think about them as a sort of a fiscal movement, a movement for fiscal restraint. They want, again, smaller government, less spending, and they feel that will help fix the economy. But again, the other aspect of the Tea Party is this cultural conservatism, which, interestingly enough, galvanized the base of the Republican Party and led to some initial successes. But I actually agree with you that I think long term they're actually losing their broader appeal. And possibly if they continue with those policies, they will perhaps lose their ability to function as a national party. They will start to represent one segment of the American population.
And we'll get deep into that as soon as we return from break. Dear viewers, please join us. Welcome back, dear viewers. On CrossRoads today, we're discussing the recent U.S. presidential election, which re-elected Barack Obama as the 44th president. Please call us at 416-623-8100 to share your questions, your thoughts, and your opinions about the U.S. election. We discussed how the first term went. What do you think in this recent election? We saw a record setting $6 billion spent on the election by the two parties, which is, unfathomable when you look at how much we spend in Canada. It's in the tens of millions. There it's $6 billion. No doubt the U.S. Presidency is the most important position in the world, arguably, and hence the interest and the pull. What issues do you think framed this election between Mitt Romney and Obama?
Well, I mean, I think the obvious one is the economy, and that's what both candidates really hammered on. I mean, there was some social policy stuff started to come up towards the end, in part because of Republican candidates who were saying extreme statements. And of course, Romney got caught saying that 47% of Americans are not going to support him because they're just taking handouts. And that kind of attitude, I think, really did hurt him in the election. But the economy, I think, remained the biggest issue. And I think one of the reasons why Obama won is that he could say that the economy has been growing and that he started off inheriting an extremely negative economic situation that he's been able to climb somewhat out of the way out. So I think that actually helped him, that he could show, I have done some things are improving. They're maybe not where everyone wants them to be, but they have been improving. Now that being said, I think Romney's great strength in the debates was the economy, and especially, I think throughout all of them.
And did he live up to it? Mitt Romney?
Romney? No, I wouldn't necessarily agree with that because, well, if you look at the other way, 7.8% unemployment rate, right? If it is, it's, I think since Eisenhower's time, this is the first time a president he won as re-election with this unemployment rate. That's a kind of stretch of time, right? And if this had happened in the Europe, it would have been thrown away, right? So knowing that, Romney could have capitalized on that. He didn't. He wasn't for some reason, right? But he didn't have, like you said, he didn't have much ammunition to shoot because the track record of this, even though the economy was not growing, but it was not going further down, right? So it's maintaining is another aspect of Obama's successful first term, right? So Romney didn't have any ammunition.
But many will say that Obama won not because of his own record, even if it's just sustaining it, but because it was a more critical or negative campaign against Romney.
Barack Obama.
He didn't really highlight his own success, if any, but he just put the spotlight on Romney's history as venture capitalist or equity fund guy, right? Is that true?
But Romney didn't capitalize on his success, like the Olympics, management of Olympics and all that. He did a very successful management of that project, and also Massachusetts as a state, he did a very successful run on it. So he didn't capitalize on them, even though he was. Yes, Obama was attacking with attack ads and attacking, and that was his mode. But on the other hand, the ground troops were mobilized on his track record, right? On Obama's, whereas
on more the social issues.
On social issues and Obamacare and everything, right? But Romney, his troops they are not they are affluential, right? They are not mobilized by these door-to-door campaigns. They are mobilized by just by the phone, and then in assembly, in dinners and things like that. They're not there to talk about the economy. They are in self-interest, right? So the ground was not as rich for Romney.
Okay,
as rich opposed to Obama.
How do you feel about?
Well, I would say that I think his basically negative campaign or having a campaign that focused on attacking Romney worked. He won the election. I think you could argue it was successful, and that. When you've only had modest accomplishments, right? As we said, Obama's done some things successfully during his first term, but in many ways that's just been digging the United States out of a hole. So I don't know if it's wise to focus on that because it may not look that great to say, well, things are bad, but they could be worse. That's not really, I think, going to galvanize people. But to say, rather than focus on that, but to say if the other guy gets in, these are the kinds of things you're going to be facing. And especially, I would say, there's a real populist aspect to American culture, which Obama galvanized. The working and middle class. As
do you think he
elitist.
tapped into his own class upbringing? He was very middle class, raised by a single mom. Do you think, whereas Romney grew up in privilege and in money, do you think that played a role?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think Romney seemed to have a disconnect, as all these statements would come out, my wife drives a couple of Cadillacs, or, my friends who own racing teams and things like that. These comments people picked up on as saying, okay, this guy's in a completely different league financially than the vast majority of people, whereas Obama's story is definitely one that I think more Americans can relate to. And I think that helped.
But then again, Romney didn't have choice, right? In order to get elected in nomination to get himself nominated, he has to be in that extreme right because the Tea Party's agenda, right? Yeah. But he should have moved back to the center soon as he was elected. Yeah. But he stayed too long in that camp and then propagating their agenda, right? So he couldn't catch up with Obama's negative ads.
Well, some own Republicans in these last few days, they have expressed the opinion that Romney became too moderate after the primaries. If only he was more right wing, he would have won.
No, I wouldn't agree with that. But
I think that's completely crazy. Okay. Yeah, I don't think that has a
So given that Obama didn't really highlight his own, first term record as to run on, and we've discussed how, there are constraints in the first term and being, re-elected was the priority. What do you think his next 4 years will be like?
Next 4 years is very challenging, and but like in every president's second term, right? He would be bold enough than the first term to make some of his policies and agendas, to fulfill. But then again, the problem here is if the Chinese economy is going to be, if it is going to be a major threat, and then Chinese expands in the South China Sea and the military side and the foreign affairs side, he will be facing a tough world to contend with, right? So I think domestically, the Obamacare will be costing more money. That's one prediction, right? And also the economy, if China is under the new president, and if it's not going to be living up to this expectation, that's going to cause a major burden on American economy, and then that will be a very challenging one for him the second term. So,
Right.
Well, I think the challenge that he's going to face is that Congress remains gridlocked. And it's very difficult for him to do things.
But with the Democrats they have control of the Senate.
Yeah.
But
I still don't think that they have enough that they can just push through legislation. Okay. I don't think that's going to be possible.
There's still going to be that.
I think there's still going to be some gridlock. We were seeing it right now when they're talking about this approaching fiscal cliff. Right? They're already digging their trenches, and the Republicans are saying, we're not going to raise taxes on the wealthy, and Obama is saying we have to, and you're seeing almost a game of chicken of who's going to hold out longer as they approach this cliff. So that to me illustrates that fact that gridlock is still there. Now, on some issues, I think he will be able to throw his weight around a bit more because the Republicans in this last election, I think, are getting the message that they need to reach out to other kinds of voters, and that means compromising some of their previous positions like immigration and things like that.
Well, on that note, some predict that Obama will have an easier time these next 2 years because they're predicting a civil war. Maybe it's too harsh a term, within the Republican Party. Those going, we have to moderate, and then those who are saying, no, we have to stay more right-wing, stay true to our principles.
I think there's one, if there's any shining light in the Republican camp, is Ron Paul, Texas, right? If he can come out with swinging, then Republican will have a very...
that libertarian, small government philosophy, you think?
Yes, but on the other hand, he is also on... he understands the constituency very well, rather than Romney or that kind of Tea Party agenda people, right? So, but on the other hand, like you said, the House Congress will be very, very difficult for Obama to handle, and then unless he uses a presidential decree or something, that it's very hard to pass his issues that is close to the constituency that has voted for.
On that
right?
point, Rory, do you think the Republicans are going to go more to a small government but socially liberal philosophy of Ron Paul, or they'll tack to the center?
I think if the Republican Party is wise, they're going to try to broaden their appeal. I don't think they're going to go further to the right. I mean, I think that will really sink them. I mean, I think that's really why they lost this last election. They really do need to reach out to growing demographics in the United States. Just Hispanic voters, for instance, are now a much larger bloc and voted overwhelmingly in favor of Obama. And so they need to start reaching out to those groups, or they're going to start just becoming the party of conservative white male Christians, which is really their base now, and that is a shrinking demographic. So they have to address that, or they're going to become increasingly irrelevant.
There've been some U.S. commentators, conservative commentators, who've espoused, or they've said good things about Canadian conservatism. The Harper style, which is appealing to interest groups, fiscal conservative supposedly, and also and not really pushing the social conservative issues, putting it to the side. Do you see the Republicans moving towards a Canadian conservatism?
I think the Canadian conservatism is moving closer to U.S. style, because if you look at it, Harper is a bit clever in that in how he approaches this. Traditionally, we have been dealing with about 85% of our export to the United States. Now he's trying to reach out to Asian countries and other countries, right? But on the other hand, Jason Kenney, his immigration minister, he is very careful in maintaining the mix. Even though it's in about 20 years' time, it'll be 50-50 non-whites and versus whites. But Jason Kenney, he has his, he's looking after that side as well, right? So not to lose out too much on the non-white issues, right? So I think knowing how the America has been transformed, I think Canada under Harper's conservatives, they're very careful in maintaining that social conservatism to get repeat elections, right? So,
and do you agree with that?
To some degree, I mean, culturally speaking, much of the United States is more conservative than Canada. We don't quite have a Bible Belt in Canada, quite like the U.S. does. The percentage of evangelicals in Canada is much smaller than in the United States, I believe.
Well, Harper self-describes as an evangelical.
Right, but he doesn't wear it on his sleeve while he's governing, which wouldn't go over well in Canada. I mean, in the United States, you have to have a faith confession to get elected. You have to talk about your relationship to God. And you're Christian. It really, at this point, I still don't know if a non-Christian could be elected president. I mean, it's hard to say exactly, but in Canada, that kind of faith confession, I don't think would go over near as well. So culturally, the U.S. can afford Republicans can afford to be a little bit more socially conservative.
But do you think they'll drop the major socially conservative, like abortion, gay rights, gay marriage?
This election, I think, is a signal to them that they need to start considering that. That overall, the culture has shifted. The cultural changes that happened in the 1960s have basically gone mainstream at this point. The majority of Americans do support things like abortion, gay marriage. We're seeing the legalization of marijuana in a few states. So I think they got to read the writing on the wall and say, we need to start shifting our policy, or again, we have that shrinking demographic.
And on that note, a lot of the states we saw in this election had specific propositions on their ballot box, right? We saw California legalize marijuana, a few states legalized gay marriage, and there were these very specific ones. In Michigan, they had one on the bridge, which is very important to trade within Canada and US at the Detroit-Windsor crossing. In Canadian politics, it's less frequent. The last one I remember is in 2007 provincial election, we had a ballot box question on proportional representation. And going before that, I could think of the Charlottetown Accord, right? That referendum question. Should Canadian politics embrace that specific proposition vote during our elections?
I don't know. Practically, that would be the law. It will take longer time for the voters to line up, and I don't know whether that, including that in the elections, the parliamentary elections, would be a good idea. But then again, that getting some kind of a referendum on many issues is the best way. But then again, what happens to this gun registry, right? If it is put on the referendum, it will fail. But conservatives want that, and so they will not necessarily put that those kind of things on the agenda.
And what do you think? Does that run against Canadian cultural politics?
Well, I mean, it's interesting with propositions because, as you're describing, they can go either way. I mean, there's a number of issues that the elites and the government tend to be more liberal on, in many cases, than the majority of Canadians, and vice versa. There's other issues where the majority of Canadians might be a little bit more liberal than maybe the current government. But it's I think such a mixed bag with propositions because, as you say, there's certain things like if there was propositions to repeal the legality of gay marriage, maybe certain provinces in Canada might go for that, and all of a sudden it would become illegal to get married, in Alberta or Saskatchewan.
Do you think it's because Canadian politics is very centralized in the Premier's office and the Prime Minister's office, they would be reluctant to give that power away? That decision making.
The British parliamentary system is designed that way, right?
Yeah, but do you think is that our reluctance?
I think so. I think that is the part. Yeah.
Okay. Well, it's time for a quick break. Dear viewers, please join us and certainly call us and share your thoughts and opinions on the U.S. election. Welcome back, dear viewers. Today on CrossRoads, we're discussing the recent U.S. presidential election. We were discussing how Obama and U.S. politics in general galvanize and garners a lot of attention from Canadians. And why do you think that attraction is there? On Facebook, something we've all shared is that a lot of people who never comment or share anything on Canadian politics were talking about the U.S. election, even during the debates. Why is that the case?
I think depend on the constituencies who are paying more attention. So one side is awaiting the spillage of the foreign policy of Obama's as well as the economic policies, how they are going to shape up the future Americas, and that will have a direct impact on Canada, right? And on the social policies, right? If California can have some marijuana laws passed, whether those kind of thing can happen here, right? So, and also the special interest groups like the gay marriages and all those kind of things, if a strict conservative America can approve that, why not in Canada, right? So there are so many things that will have this spillover effect, in Canada.
Based on the issues?
Based on the issues, as well as the economy, right? Right now, like we said before, that 80 to 85% export goes to America, and Obama's policy, if it can, recuperate from the 2008 2010 meltdown. And that's going to cause the economy in Canada, to either go to tailspin or
so
to boom.
Our economic relationship?
Yeah, it's important because the housing problem in the States. People have been worrying. People have been taking time to watch whether the house prices will go down here or it's going to shoot up again. So housing starts is the base of the whole economy.
Rory, why do you think U.S. has such attraction here?
I mean, I think U.S. politics are probably watched around the globe more than almost any other politics, just because the stakes are so high. I think that's one of the reasons why people don't really pay too much attention to Canadian politics. One, we're a very small country. Actually, I mean, space-wise, we're huge, but our economy and our population is smaller than California, right? So the U.S. is a huge country, and of course, with its global role, it is the most powerful country currently.
Do you think young Canadians have been paying as much attention, say, during the Bush years? I don't feel that same resonance is there or was there.
I mean, Obama, I think, is partly, you can take credit for that. I mean, and I would even say his first term, when he first got elected, I mean, I myself and a lot of friends were sort of rapt watching his inauguration,
Style,
the sort of the historical moment of it. And I think too, in American politics, personal narrative does play a bigger role. Stephen Harper doesn't spend time talking about his childhood and how he became the prime minister. He doesn't frame it in this narrative, whereas Americans tend to frame their politics in this grand narrative. So for Obama, it's kind of fulfilling the civil rights and his own life. And
so do you think it's because of the historical significance of being the first African American president, or is it a larger part his character, his personality?
I would say both almost equally. I mean, the historical significance is undeniable, and I think most people were fascinated by that. But at the same time, he's incredibly charismatic. I mean, his campaign in 2000 and 2008, and I mean, it was brilliant. So.
Yeah, he's the BlackBerry guy. He's the first president to use the social networks and these kind of the modern tools for his elections, right? And younger people of this yuppie generation, right? They identify with him rather than with Bush. So it's a change of times, and people recognize that.
Some say his oratorical ability, his speaking ability garnered more attention than it deserved. Do you think that criticism is true? That the style, the marketing of the campaign was more appealing than the actual, the sizzle, more sizzle than steak?
Yeah, I agree. I agree with that, because he's like a Southern Baptist, the oratorship comes from that general background of Martin Luther King and all that, right? So that's a style that he has been following. Very eloquent. His conversation delivery is very good, as opposed to Romney's. As opposed to any Republicans. I haven't seen even Paul Ryan, younger person, but he didn't deliver the message as eloquently as Obama did, So,
what do you think, Rory, that Canadian politics can learn from American politics?
Well, I mean, one of the things is, as I was saying before, I mean, I think bringing personal narrative into politics might actually make it more interesting. I mean, and personalities are partly what really draws people to pay attention. And I think the last time that you had a real large personality was probably Pierre Trudeau, where people were fascinated by who he was as a person and his life story.
Colorful.
Colorful, right? A real colorful character and some kind of charisma. And, I think injecting some of that into Canadian politics would help. I mean, Justin Trudeau might do that. It's here to see, but...
as we, talk about the future, many people within, as soon as the election was called, people were discussing who's going to run in 2016, 4 years from now. And we all know Obama can't run. It's the end of his second term. What are your thoughts on that question? Who will represent the Democrats and the Republicans?
I think Hillary Clinton is taking, I think he's vacating his post, and then she's preparing for take a run on 2016, I heard.
And you don't think her age at that time will be a factor?
I think, it will be a factor, but then again, there is a big force behind her. Is Bill Clinton, right? He is an ageless man. He can mobilize things, and I think somebody said, Obama's campaign also got boosted because of Bill Clinton's efforts. So that's on the Democrats, but on the Republican side, I don't see any rising star.
Rory?
I mean, you could kind of joke that if there was a president that Americans might create a third term for, it would be Bill Clinton. And, it's almost too bad in a way that he couldn't run. But, I mean, I think on the Republican side, if I think the Republicans need to look at somebody like Marco Rubio. If they could have a Hispanic American candidate, I think that would do a lot to show that they're willing to branch out from their current base. And to me, that would be a very advisable
strategic.
move.
He comes from Florida.
Yeah.
He gave what people say is a great arousing speech at the Republican convention. But is the Republican base ready to accept a Latino as their candidate?
They don't have choice. They have to. They don't have choice because in order to break the neck of this constituency that has voted for Obama, he has to come from a similar background, like Hispanic or another African American, or from a very strong, colorful character from Republican side.
And the charisma as well. I think, as you said, Marco Rubio has that kind of oratory, that kind of charisma, and that is
a personal narrative.
Yeah, it is, and you're right. It sometimes sizzle is more than substance, but it still counts for something. It still mobilizes people, and it's still very effective in, I think, winning elections.
And there's also talk that the Bush family might send
Jeb Bush.
Bush.
I think he is preparing for that as well. But some commentators said as long as he has that name Bush, that's it. He's out.
He's out because of his
because
brother.
Of that name, because of father and also his brother, right?
The New Jersey governor Chris Christie. Some people will argue Chris Christie's support for Obama during the Hurricane Sandy's after effects, where he went on TV for 3 days straight and praised President Obama's handling of the crisis, helped attract a lot of independent voters and even some Republicans to support Obama. Do you think that's true? And also, will that hurt him when he runs in 2016 for the private?
It was an interesting move, and I mean, I think he is somebody who shoots from the hip, So I think he does say what he thinks, which is an admirable quality in politics. And too many politicians don't. But there's a question mark for me around why he was his praise of Obama's handling of Sandy, was that just shooting from the hip? Was he genuinely impressed? I mean, possibly, as I said, that is his personality.
It was sustained over 3 days. But
it's something, seems to indicate that he might be trying to broaden his appeal. Yeah.
Was it a strategic move, quickly?
I think so, because his support is localized. He's in New Jersey, under a distress call. He should be on the side of whoever is helping. So I think it's not more than that.
In any case, it'll make for very interesting politics 4 years from now. Thank you, dear viewers, for tuning into TVI's Crossroads. I'm your host, Parthy Kandaval. Have a good week.
தமிழரின் பிம்பம் உங்கள் டிவி.